Well, more people coming. Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. As I mentioned earlier, we have a number of our stakeholders that are on vacation this week. So we decided to cancel tomorrow because we didn't want to do two meetings with the same folks not available. So thank you so much for coming. Today, we wanted to talk about an ombuds, permit specialist, environmental justice advocate kind of position. And one of the issues is whether or not this would be a standalone Act 250 person or it would involve other permitting programs. So that's one of the conversations that we wanted to have because our environmental justice law applies to most, if not all, of the agencies that do permitting in the state of Vermont. And then to have a discussion about what are the needs and how best to support applicants or others that want to be involved in the permitting process. I also wanted to have some kind of historical knowledge and background about the previous position of permit specialist, which was housed within Agency of Natural Resources, what those functions were, and what impact that it's had, and whether or not we think this kind of reinstituting a similar kind of position would be beneficial in terms of moving the permitting more quickly. So for today's conversation, I want to just mention that I have invited Peter Kopsko, who is one of our district coordinators, to come and chat with us. There he is, waving to us. And I'll get to that. I just want to show you a couple slides before we ask Pete to give us a little bit of background and history on what the permit specialist was. He held that position at A&R. So he can give us some background knowledge. I see Billy Coster's on the call as well, would love his input. So I'm very pleased to be able to have Peter be part of this conversation so that we have some data and history to understand what function used to be performed in view of what the kinds of needs that we are trying to fulfill with this particular office or position. So if you guys could raise your hands on your computer, we'll take you in order in terms of comments and that people wish to share with us. But before we start, I do want to just introduce to you, because I know we've kind of glossed over this because of time issues in the past, but besides Peter Kopsko, who is one of our district coordinators, today we have Janet Hurley, the chair of the Land Use Review Board, as our other board member. There she is. And she is heading our and responsible for our environmental justice obligations of the LUR. So it's a much broader, they're much broader obligations than just this one issue that we're talking about today, which is how to work with those obligations to really make a true difference in an improvement in assisting people through the permitting process. But there are many other tasks and defining obligations that need to take place. So thrilled to have her with us today. We have our new interim general counsel, Jenny Ronis, with us today. Here, she's waving to us. Pete Gill, who's our executive director, is also present. I see his little circle picture on the attendance. And then, of course, we have Alex, who is our technical genius to help me through the meeting. So thank you, Alex. So the first thing that I wanted to discuss and just show you briefly are, we'll go through it very quickly, has to do with our obligations under the environmental justice law. I thought it might be helpful to look through that just to remind ourselves of the importance of just to remind ourselves of the obligations that we have under that law. It came into effect in 2022. And the Land Use Review Board is one of the covered agencies. We are a participant in the project, in the process. The legislation gives the LURB direction to focus our energy, but does not solve for environmental injustice. And the environmental justice lens is a toolkit by which to apply our resources. For example, language access through public engagement and participation, tracking those benefits and burdens that are to be allocated fairly, and understanding and clarifying how communities are defined. So when I say we have much broader obligations than this particular study is looking at, that's what I was referring to. So the purpose of the environmental justice law is to identify, reduce, and eliminate environmental health disparities to improve the health and well-being of Vermont residents. There is a very long definition of environmental justice, but what it refers to are that all individuals are afforded equitable access and distribution of environmental benefits, equitable distribution of environmental burdens, and fair and equitable treatment. And this is the part that's really important for our study. And meaningful participation in decision-making processes, including development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So this study is wanting to look at an ombuds, permit specialist type of position so that we can make this a reality, that there is meaningful participation in the decision making, which includes permitting of actual projects. Now, within the EJ law, there is a focus population that requires special consideration to the defined populations, and that is annual median household income not more than 80% of the state median income, persons of color and indigenous peoples that comprise at least 6% or more of the population, and at least 1% or more of households that have limited English proficiency. I'm going to skip over the benefits and the burdens slide because I want to, again, focus on meaningful participation. And it mimics that same language, but that's what we're trying to really focus on, is how can we make this process more accessible to the focus populations as well as all Vermonters. And then these are all the covered agencies. So we're talking about ANR, VTrans, and I'm picking out the ones that I know have, specific permitting processes like ours related to land use. We then have the Public Utility Commission that does siting for telecommunications towers, energy projects, that sort of thing. Natural Resources Board, because we were called that before, we're now the Land Use Review Board. And also the Department of Public Service, which is the related to the Public Utility Commission. They are the advocacy arm of the government. And public advocate, I guess, might be a way to describe them at times. They do represent the public interest, but they do not represent individuals. So the other thing that I want to share with you before we start our discussion is, so in 2023, there was a report that was provided to the legislature that was called the Necessary Updates to Act 250. And bring that up. And in that study, the issue of an ombuds office or permit specialist was discussed and talked about. And so I have extricated the most important aspects from that report to show what they were contemplating, and this led to Act 181 and the changes into your jurisdiction and the composition of the board. And in addition to that, in terms of trying to determine staffing and other supports for permitting, one of the recommendations was to provide additional support in the pre-application process, especially for applicants with less capacity and or fewer resources. This could include funding for permit specialists, navigators, or ombuds who can assist applicants in putting their applications together and navigating the permitting process. The staff serving in this role should have specific expertise in Act 250 permitting requirements and processes. Specific options that they recommended were creating an ombuds position within the Natural Resources Board, which is now the LUR, or creating a new permit specialist role, which used to be housed again at A&R. It would be important to ensure this role is independent from Act 250 permitting review process to enable the provision of impartial advice and ensure there are no conflicts of interest. It would also be helpful to place the role within an institution or agency that has an active interest in enabling economic development and specialized expertise on Act 250.
Brooke, we have a question.
Yes, Tom.
Brooke, do you or does anyone else know whether the work and discussions that led up to that 2023 report also looked at the specialist position as one that would be a source of assistance for persons other than applicants, possibly for persons trying to, a neighbor or someone in the community who had questions about what was going on or what the permit process looked like and how they could participate in the permitting process. Do you know whether that was ever looked at?
I do not. I have read the report several times and it's simply not called out. But I think the focus of our inquiry is more broad. I think the permit specialist, in fact, did assist applicants in the past, but I think we are trying to consider a broader office, even with a couple employees, to be able to address the other participants in the permitting process, because there is a lot of concern about pro se's delaying the process or not being acquainted and it causing more time delays. As well as we're trying to incorporate our EJ responsibilities as well. So what I'm hoping for is a broader conversation of what the role would be so that we can help all comers in a sense.
Thanks.
Janet.
I was just going to add, in terms of meeting our EJ responsibilities, that, there are many people who are affected by our program in terms of our jurisdictional triggers and whether they're applicants or neighbors or what have you. And so I think that that's what Brooke means in terms of meeting everybody's needs relative to our program, and particularly people who fall under those EJ focused populations. And I think it's more likely that those are not going to be applicants. So.
Great, thank you. So before we go further, I would like to ask Pete to share his experience and knowledge of the position of permit specialist, how it used to be, and then he can also talk in terms of being a district coordinator and what he might see as assistance to lighten the load that has fallen on our district coordinators as a result of the alteration in positions at A&R. So Pete, if you could take the microphone, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure.
Um, and feel free to interrupt me or ask any questions. So yeah, I was a permit specialist before I was district coordinator. There were 4 permits. For those of you who don't know, I'm sure a lot of you do know, but for those of you who don't know, there were 4 permit specialists. We covered each covered approximately a quarter of the state. And we had 2 main functions. One was we were a resource. People could call us and ask questions about whether they would need a permit for a given project that they were envisioning. So we would just take calls from the public, with questions about, and getting to one of the points earlier, primarily for developers, people who are doing a development project. And in addition to providing guidance on the phone, we would also create a document called a project review sheet. It was a form, typically a page or 2, could extend into 3 or 4 pages, depending. And it include basic information about the project, the location, a project description, and skipping around in the form. The latter pages were all other permits, other state permits, not even just Agency of Natural Resources permits, but also other like fire safety permits that the permit specialist, someone who's trained to know about state permitting in general, thought that the person would need for that project, right? So we would open up the Agency of Natural Resources Atlas and look at whether there were any mapped wetlands or hydric soils, and if so, would refer the applicant to talk to the wetland specialist. And it was precise in that, we knew which wetland person to talk, which wetland ecologist to call. And so we'd put you in touch with, say, Shannon Morrison, because your project is in Washington County, and she's the wetland ecologist who covers that area. And then one of the other important aspects of the project description is we would also send this document to the Act 250 district coordinator, who would make a determination and issue a jurisdictional opinion as to whether or not the project needed a Act 250 permit. Okay, so this is one of the 2 things that we would do. That's calls from the public and providing advice and creating a project review sheet with specific information about permits that you would need for a project that you would call this about. The other is we would review all wastewater permit applications. The project review sheet actually predated the creation of permit specialists. It dates back to I want to say it goes all the way back to 1970, but definitely goes back to the early 1970s. It was at that time a triplicate form, carbon. And it was filled out by either Act 250 or wastewater staff. I think it changed over time, or they would handle it somehow in each office a little differently, I think. But anyway, every wastewater permit application got one of these project review sheets, and it had that checklist of permits that you might need, and it included the place for the district coordinator to sign off. And while you're thinking about, I'm going to stop now and see what Brooke or wants me to talk about next, or if there are any questions. But one of the significant things that it seems to me that you guys have to decide is where the project, if you want to have this function and have the project review sheet again, just bear in mind that there's a Supreme Court decision that says that district coordinators cannot initiate a jurisdictional opinion request. And so the fact that it was the Agency of Natural Resources asking for the jurisdictional opinion is significant.
Gotcha. If there aren't any questions about what Pete's talked about presently, then Pete, I'd like you to now explain with so the permit specialist went away. What was it replaced by, and what was the impact on the district coordinators?
Right. So the Agency of Natural Resources during COVID got some federal funds to create what's called the Permit Navigator. You guys have all heard about that. The Permit Navigator is an online tool. Anyone can go and use it. It's on the DEC website. It's very prominently featured there. If you haven't used it, I'd encourage you to go check it out. It's got two components. It's you have to provide a location, and it pulls up map data. The same sort of background information that's in the Agency of Natural Resources Atlas. It pulls that up, and it also then asks you a series of questions about your project. First of all, what kind of project it is. It's all, I mean, it's not artificial intelligence. It was created in a spreadsheet, but it tracks down through a flow chart, if you will, of questions depending on previous answers. And it gives you at the end a printout of potential permits you might need, somewhat similar to what permit specialists would have done previously, and who to call. And the decision, once that tool was made, or as that was coming together, the Agency of Natural Resources decided to do away with permit specialists and have the Permit Navigator be the tool that people use to try to figure out what permits they need. I've heard a lot about it. I participated in one of these meetings a few weeks ago or a month or so ago, and I've heard mostly negative things about the Permit Navigator. I think it's a cool tool. I think it's a really useful tool. I thought when it was being created, and I was on the team that helped create it, I thought that the goal was to try to address a different problem. That problem was, prior to the Permit Navigator, if you didn't want to pick up the phone, if you were just say you're new to permitting in Vermont, and you had a project in mind, you knew you weren't where you wanted to put it, you really couldn't go to the DEC website and find out what permits you would need, right? You would go to the DEC website, there's no Permit Navigator, and you'd have to click on, the directory on the left-hand side of the page, the menu of the different permit divisions, right? And if you didn't think you had wetlands, you weren't going to even click on wetlands. So this was to try to, for that kind of situation, to help people who are trying to figure out on their own what they would need. But in my mind, it's very far short of what the permit specialists would do, right? So permit specialists, like that second thing, we were reviewing every single wastewater permit that came into the department. I think the reason that was chosen, I'm quite sure, I mean, it wasn't around at the time, but I think the reason that was chosen just because it was the most common permit that, people have to get. If you have to only get one permit, that's the one you're going to wind up having to get. So this is voluntary. No one has to click it. So you're not getting projects reviewed just sort of routinely. And then, it's not a person to talk to with some expertise who can talk to you. When I was a permit specialist, I would talk to people about, well, what does it mean? What does getting a wetland permit mean? What the time frame, the time of year in which you can expect to get a wetland delineation, right? Like you can't do it during the winter because they look at plants. When we're talking about acreage, the different types of ways that we talk about acreage for stormwater, for example, in Act 250, that is no longer part of those things. We lost all of those things.
So then has some of that interaction had to be picked up now by the coordinators?
Yes. Right. So as a result, district coordinators are now, so there was always the ability to ask a district coordinator for a jurisdictional opinion. That would happen in the past. But the vast majority of Act 250 jurisdictional opinions came through the project review sheet. District coordinators now are doing more jurisdictional opinions. And when I say that there's workload that's associated with that. So the permit specialist would take all that information, would find out would take down the location of the project description, look up the project, look to see if there were any prior permits on the project. Do a whole lot of stuff that we now do ourselves because there's no one else doing it. So that's additional work for district coordinators. And so that's one very obvious part of it. But we also are increasingly the people, the person people will call with questions about permitting because they don't have anyone else to turn to, right? They don't have a permit specialist to talk to. And so I find myself, and all the other coordinators will tell you, that we find ourselves providing the type of guidance that permit specialists used to do. And it's just that much more work, and it's valuable work. I'm not saying that I don't want to do it. I still feel that the best thing for people to do is to reach out and find out what permits they need as early as possible in the process. And I'm happy to provide that. But it's something that we used to have 4 full-time people doing that we no longer do.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Does anyone have any questions for Peter? Yeah.
Do you have an estimate of how many inquiries you got in a quarter or a year?
When I was a permit
on
specialist,
average? Yeah.
I used to keep track of it.
Uh-huh.
I did it for like 5 years and I don't remember it all. Hundreds.
Okay.
Hundreds.
Yeah.
Hundreds and hundreds. Yes.
Yeah.
Billy.
I think,
Oh,
Billy, you could
okay.
probably find that information. Go ahead.
Thanks, Pete, for that overview. That was great. Just a couple questions and a couple comments. I just want folks to understand some context here, right? Like the previous system that Pete spoke to was automatically triggering jurisdictional opinion requests on behalf of people if they filed for a wastewater permit or requested a project review sheet effectively, right? So, I think there's real questions about whether folks went into that with full knowledge and awareness that it was triggering that thing. Because as you all know, once a JO is issued and takes jurisdiction over a parcel, that's there forever, right? So that while that function was certainly helpful, and I know Pete and the other permit specialists did a tremendous amount of work to help kind of provide background information for coordinators to make those determinations and whatnot. That kind of automatic nature, I think, raises a lot of equity questions just in and of itself about people's awareness and knowingness and kind of consent to that decision being made. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, I think the permit specialists were incredibly knowledgeable about the kind of jurisdictional triggers of our programs, of yours, and were and continue to help people understand like when certain permits are necessary and as Pete said, when the work can be done to prepare those applications. But correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, that's you weren't able to assist folks in actually navigating the specific permit processes. So there'd be like a handoff to the wetlands program if someone actually needed a wetlands application. And at that point forward, they'd be working with those programs on obtaining those permits. So I think I just am trying to make the point that the permit specialists were not necessarily seeing people through the entire process to get the permit. They weren't deconflicting different programs within the agency or helping folks troubleshoot issues if and when they came up with permit applications. If I have that wrong, Pete, please correct me, but that's my understanding generally.
So it's hard to talk totally in generalities, right? Because so many of the projects were, one-off, one other permit was needed.
Right.
Of course, we didn't make jurisdictional opinions at all, determinations at all. So we would refer you to the specific programs for their own determinations, not just Act 250, but I wouldn't tell you needed a wastewater permit, or I wouldn't tell you needed a stormwater permit. Or I couldn't give you the final answer. I could tell you why I thought you'd want to call them, but ultimately you would need to get that decision from Shannon Morrison or from Kevin Burke. And then as for assisting with other things, it could get awkward right? So there were times, we were oftentimes the people someone would call, say, for example, they were not, one of the program staff wasn't returning their call, right? You got a hold of me, you called somebody in one of the programs 3 times, they didn't get back to you. We did serve that role, right? Didn't happen very often. I think it happened, less frequently than one might thought, but one might think it happens in bureaucracy, but it did happen, and we did do that. We did sometimes serve in that role that you're describing of like helping resolve conflicts. I would, and I'd work with Jen, Mojo, and people in your office to set up like site visits. If you had a project that had a lot of potentially conflicting permitting programs, right? If you had a site and they were going to need a wetlands permit and a stormwater permit, and they were in a river, and so they had habitat issues, permit specialists did help set up those types of meetings. Or we would get called into meetings from time to time. A hot new project, the commissioner's office would, send word down that they wanted staff to help facilitate a meeting to talk about some new project. And permit specialists were usually part of those discussions, and we would either take the lead on it through a project review sheet, or Jen or your staff would take the lead. So we did sometimes serve that role. We also would get questions from the public, right? So our main job was to help developers, right? And we would do project review sheets for development for projects. But we certainly got calls from neighbors who had objections. We often would get, the calls would get routed to us of people who had questions about, say, overshadowing with wastewater permits, for example. We'd take a lot of calls and questions about that. So, not unlike the district coordinator, we kind of helped all comers.
Thank you.
But was that a big part of our work? No.
So I don't want to take up too much time. I'm just going to make one more comment. Thanks for that, Pete. So, we had this at DEC had this model where there was a number of permit specialists providing kind of statewide coverage for kind of anyone that needed it. If projects as simple that needed a single permit all the way up to the very complicated ones. We moved to the permit navigator to try to kind of automate that referral system to the different permit programs. I think there's been mixed results. I think that works fine for some people, for others it doesn't. That freed up capacity within DEC to lean into the Healthy Homes program and another number of other ARPA programs, where we were able to provide really dedicated assistance to especially kind of low-income Vermonters and accessing a number of programs that had significant improvements for their kind of public health and well-being. As those programs are starting to phase down, I think DEC is taking another look at whether we can stand up individual assistance for permitting, not probably all the way back to where we were with permit specialists, but to have folks available to do the sort of big, complicated, targeted support that Pete was kind of referring to at the end. So that's an open conversation within our agency right now. So I don't know where that's going to end, but I think, this is, when you make one change, you live with it for a while, see what the repercussions are, and then you often adjust. And I think we're in that place right now. But thanks, Pete, for all that background and perspective you shared.
Annette?
Yeah, what year did the transition take place? When was the last permit specialist? And were you physically housed in Waterbury? And were you doing this entirely by phone, or would people come in and talk to you, and would you have meetings?
So I forget exactly when, but it was the end of COVID. I want to say the permit navigator was created using COVID funds, not ARPA funds, but some COVID money. And so that was what COVID was 2019, 2020, like 2021, 2022 in that time frame. I'm not exactly sure. And then so initially, the permit specialists were located in regional offices. this was a time when the permit specialist came into being. Things were filed by paper, and permit specialists needed to review the wastewater permit application files in order to do their work. And so, that was a big chunk of our work. So we were in the regional offices, not all of them. So I covered Barry and, which is District 5. And I also covered the Northeast Kingdom, which is District 7. What I would do is I would go one day a week up to the St. Johnsbury Regional Office, and I would review those permit applications there. And then, we were in offices. We took calls. Most of it was by phone. I think that goes back. Most, people are just calling and asking questions. But we would meet people in person at the office. Sometimes we'd offer to meet them at their site. And I think for a while before I started, there was even an arrangement where permit specialists would spend half a day at various regional planning commission offices. I think that was like an outreach thing that kind of fizzled. I think that it was underutilized.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Janet.
Pete, that's interesting. I'm not sure I knew about the Regional Planning Commission thing, but I did know that at least the permit specialist for the area in which I was the zoning administrator, planning director, he made the rounds every year, and he went and did outreach at the municipal level. Every year he gave us a new stack of his business cards. So is that something that you also did?
Yep. You had Rick, right? Rick was the best person for that. He loved going out and meeting people in their offices and bringing our little brochures. Used to be brochures and cards. And he just really got a kick out of that part of the work. And he would always get great praise for all of his outreach efforts. So he was the best of the four of us at that. But we all did that. I think the expectation that we had in the end was a third of our towns every year, so a 3-year cycle. And that I did the minimum. Sorry, I did not enjoy I did not enjoy that part of the job.
You had a large area to cover, it sounds like.
Yeah. So you just get in the car. The first time I tried to do it, I tried scheduling them. It was a bust because so many small towns with different office times. And then they'd ask if I wanted to come and meet with the select board. And of course, I'd happy to meet with the select board, but that was in the evening. And so you just get in the state car for a day and drive around. Anyway, so we did a lot of outreach. So we did that. And we had a lot of we would sit and meet and talk about ways to try to get outreach out to people, so people would know about our services and reach out to us as early as possible. So we would create posters. We would go to trade, little, Vermont business trade groups would go and make speech, give presentations or make a speech or man a booth at things. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks. Greg.
Hi, Peter. So I guess you've got some experience here, and I'm wondering, what would you recommend to make this process a little more predictable and quicker or more efficient? It sounds like to me that you could use a few more people. It would be take some load off and maybe move things along quicker, so you could concentrate on more of the things that, the bigger projects, or maybe not field so many questions. So I guess my question is, what's your recommendations to help this process along with our housing crisis that we're in? I think it's important that we think about it.
I don't have a specific recommendation. But that gives me, I appreciate your question and the opportunity, to respond to something that Billy said. I thought that the assistant's office did great work. They pivoted to doing really important and great work. So this isn't a knock by me on the assistance program. I understand that we're talking about, the allocation of scarce resources. Yeah, I really liked the permit specialist role. I would love to see 4 permit specialists come back. I think that you could recommend that the sort of what it sounded like Billy was saying, that the agency or the Department of Environmental Conservation is kind of considering right now, which sounded like maybe building off the permit navigator and providing some enhancements so that there's someone to call. I think that would be super appreciated and really helpful, and that makes sense to me. I'm not saying the permit navigator tool, is a failure or shouldn't be used. I think it's a good tool, and I could see it being, in tandem with other people. I think having it housed in another agency the way it was made a lot of sense, given that district coordinators cannot initiate a jurisdictional opinion. So having somebody else, that's a Vermont Supreme Court decision that said that district coordinators can't do that. And so it's just cleaner having it come from another agency. And so I think that, if it were at A&R, that'd be great. I don't think that necessarily couldn't happen at the LURB. I suppose there's a way to work. I mean, if this is a report going to the legislature, it could include a legislative fix to that problem, where it's clear that a LURB employed ombudsman type person can request a jurisdictional opinion. There's probably ways to fix that too. And then, yeah, I think that with the district coordinators are happy to do this, right? I think I speak for all of us. We're happy to provide this sort of assistance. We think of it as an important part of our jobs to help people. That said, everything that we do that isn't drafting permits, drafting, or decisions for commissions is detracting from our speed and with our primary work, which is the processing of permit applications. So sure, if we had somebody who was, whether it's at A&R or in LURB, who could provide this guidance that we know we need to do anyway, we know that there's a need for it. I think that would be helpful.
Janet,
Kind of like a traffic director that said, "Oh, these go to you and these go over here." Then you've got somebody there to help.
and it sounds to me like the function of collecting the information, the location details on the project, and then that sounds like a time-consuming task. But packaging that up and getting it to the district coordinator, that's where it sounds to me like you're talking about the workload reducing so that you can focus and be faster with decisions. Is that fair to say, Pete?
Right,
Okay, great.
exactly. Yeah.
Janet?
Maybe this is completely out there, but when you showed the slide with the list of covered agencies for the EJ law, and you talked about the Department of Public Service a little bit, I wonder if the Department of Public Service would be a good repository for this kind of role.
Their jurisdiction is so narrow. They don't do anything outside of electric generation and generation and transmission of power. So it doesn't seem like it would be a good fit for all this commercial and residential development. It's just my own view.
I would tack on, I mean,
That's
they're
good.
not even reviewing Act 250 permit applications anymore. Maybe it'd be nice if they did have a role and then they could do that too.
That could be,
Let's ask Annette. She's been at the PUC for a long time.
that could be an interesting transition into discussing broadening this possible ombuds person, because I think it was probably 10 years ago that there was a push to get a public advocate outside of the Department of Public Service, because there was a lot of concern about the department not representing the public. And I don't know if you remember, but AARP even ran ads saying we've been representing ratepayers in rate cases and we're not going to do it anymore. And they were boycotting it until there was a separate Office of Public Advocate created. Legislation was drafted. I've been trying to get a hand on that legislation for quite a while, and nobody's turned it up. But it was a hot topic. I think it was maybe 2015, 2016, and it is still very much a need. The department is, you know, it's a political division, and it depends on who's governor, but their workload is pretty intense. They cover a lot of different issues, and most people feel that they don't generally represent the public interest, and that in particular, in cases that go before the PUC, they tell people we can't represent members of the public. Now, it used to be that when members of the public had challenges with the PUC process, they were told to go to the Department of Public Service, and the Department of Public Service would help guide them through the process. That hasn't happened for quite a while. And so that there is that loss also in terms of assisting the public in participating in cases that generally involve land use, but sometimes involve rates and other things that go before the PUC.
Billy, it sounds like maybe this should be housed in your office. You do both, right?
We
I'm
do,
teasing.
and yeah,
I'm
well,
teasing you.
I'm gonna take that bait. So just for folks, just for information sharing, the Office of Planning within the A&R Secretary's office houses folks that do conduct regulatory review of Act 250 and CPG, PUC CPG petitions, since the agency is a statutory party in both those proceedings. We act as a de facto project manager for those cases as well. So we coordinate across A&R permits that might be involved in those projects. We sometimes liaise with other state agencies and whatnot. So we do play that role for typically larger or complex Act 250 and Section 248 projects, and certainly will continue to do so. But generally, it's focused on our involvement and not that of other state agencies.
And you're saying to help the applicant through the process, Billy?
We primarily work with applicants, but we certainly engage with communities when they have questions and concerns, with other citizens. Certainly have helped organize meetings, for folks that Annette has worked with in the past, select boards in communities where large projects are being proposed and whatnot. But that's less. Generally we're helping folks who are obtaining permits navigate the process, but we're certainly available to anyone.
In the like, there's nothing new under the sun. When it was lawyers primarily providing agency comments in Act 250 cases 20 or so years ago, at least, A&R attorneys would provide comments from other state agencies, not just A&R, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, there was like the land use review panel, and something along those lines. Yeah, I saw Gina Campoli in the supermarket the other day, so it was her vintage.
So Billy, let me ask you your opinion about if the permit specialist is Pete has described had knowledge beyond A&R and Act 250 for V-Trans or Department of Health or whatever it might be. Do you see that also as working for the PUC if there were an office of, permit specialists or people to help the traffic go the right direction or what have you? Do you envision, if there were reestablishment of this, that it would be A&R and Act 250, sort of like it was before, or it sounds like it was broader so that it might cover, and seems like we should strive to cover all the permitting programs since they're all under the same umbrella.
Yeah,
You
well,
see any
I'll
difficulty with that?
I'll defer to Pete on this, but my guess is that the permit specialist traditionally primarily dealt with agency permits, and Act 250 was a big part of that, but we permit way more development than is jurisdictional under Act 250. So my sense is that their primary focus were agency permits, and then, also supporting Act 250. There's obviously other permits that other agencies issue, but there's not a whole many of them. There's, fire safety, those sorts of that realm of permitting. And then there's what the PUC does. VTrans has some, curb cut permits, but I don't hear a lot of questions or comments related to those personally. Others may.
Thank you. I'm not sure who it is, but it's a telephone number. And I can't even read the end of it on my screen.
5603.
5603. Please speak.
Anyway, my comment is that I checked this morning, DEC still has a link to the old permit handbook on its site, and it lists all of the permits that used to be on the project review sheets. And there are many, many outside of A&R and Act 250 permits, some of which are probably not relevant to an ombuds type person or permit specialist type person dealing mostly with land use issues. But I thought I'd make you aware of that.
Is this Thomas? Weiss?
Yes, this is Thomas. Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself at the very beginning, so that might not have come through. This is Thomas Weiss in Montpelier.
Thank you, Thomas. As always, we appreciate your input.
You're welcome.
And does that have PUC? Or Pete?
It does not have PUC.
Doesn't.
I don't think it does, but I could respond to that. And
Yeah.
Because they don't really issue permits. And could the person who's speaking identify himself? Because I'm on the phone, so I have no idea who's actually speaking unless I recognize the voice.
we could do a better job.
We have our district coordinator, Pete Kopsko, who's sort of responding in this conversation. So, Pete,
So
do you have any thoughts?
so we would thanks. This is Pete. And thanks, Thomas. We would update that. So I don't know if it's still, I think the Agency of Natural Resources might have done some cleanup on the requirements of the permit specialists since they don't really have them anymore. The permit specialist did have some statutorily required roles. And one of them was updating that permit handbook. And it used to be back in the day, before we had, going back before we had such a rich ability to look things up on the internet, the permit handbook was a really important tool. And permit specialists would deliver that to town offices as well. We would, the assistance office would actually, have a contract and print that. I think it was required to be updated annually, but it might have been less than annually. It might have been once every 2 years or something like that. And then speaking about the other types of permits, we would include, so the project review sheet had, a blank spot for other permits that you might need. And if I thought you needed a certificate of public good, I would include a reference and put you in touch with the Public Service Board, PUC now. And at the time, they just had like that probably still, they just had the telephone number for the clerk. And I would, if I thought of it, this is true for the permit specialists as well. We try to think of everything that you need, and we put you in touch with them. And this might get a little bit at what Annette said earlier. About the overlap, though, I have to say I probably, in my however many years I was there, 5 years, probably only did it like once or twice. It really wasn't something that came up very often. I would do the same, by the way, for the health people. I can't think, the Green Mountain Care Board. I'm in touch with them if like it was like a new wing of a hospital or something like that, as if they didn't know, but I would include it. We tried really hard to be comprehensive.
I think, is that Thomas again? Stand up.
Oh, Thomas, your hand remains up. I don't know if there it is.
Oh, okay.
I put it
And
down.
I'll just add that we still maintain a website that has all those fact sheets from the permit handbook. I put in the chat, but the chat's not activated, so that's available still.
We did that, and it's also a component of the permit navigator. So it's in two places. You can find the permit handbook is still on the DEC website. I still look at it from time to time. And the permit navigator has a tool where it's separate from what I was describing earlier. It also has this functionality where you can provide a location of your project and get whoever the contact person is for all of the permits there. And it also just includes like a description of every A&R permit.
Annette.
Sometime around 2016 or 2017, there was a fairly robust conversation at the legislature about how to improve the public process at the Public Utility Commission. And this idea of having someone who would assist came up. And my recollection is nobody wanted to house it. The PUC said, no, we don't want it. The department said, we don't want it. But as we're talking about this and the background on the permit specialist, it's becoming clear to me that we are talking about kind of two separate things. One is to help businesses. And that's why that language you showed at the beginning, Brooke, talked about having it be housed at ACCD. But the need that I see from my perspective is to help the public participate in the process, which is something that I've been doing for a long time. And there's a real need for it in all of these regulatory processes. And I will also add that we have occasionally had reason to assist people in participating in Agency of Agriculture permits. There are large farm permits that do have a public process around them. So I think we're having two different conversations unless there's a way to incorporate the permit specialist idea and assisting businesses with all that they need to do, and how to develop something that perhaps more meets the environmental justice language and is more focused on the rights of the public to participate.
Yeah, and I know that the conversation is focused around, what the permit specialist used to do and perform. But your point is very important. This effort is to improve the permitting process, particularly the speed of such. And so while I think it is very important, if need be, to reestablish support for applicants, it is just as important, if not more of a focus, at least the way that I've been looking at this process of appeals and how to speed things up, because of the specific concern about people that are not represented by council. Really important point, Annette. And so let's pursue that question, because what is it that we want this person to be able to do? What duties? Can we combine permit specialist who is helping applicants and as well as neighbors, municipalities who might be opposed to a project? And Samantha?
Hi. Sorry, I thought we were departing. I guess maybe I just want to affirm what Annette said. I'm becoming confused about this. It's confusing to me to discuss the role of an ombudsman and a permit specialist together. I'm sort of struggling to be able to provide feedback. by putting those roles, which I see as separate and distinct, because the user is a different person, or entity or organization. I guess speaking specifically to the role of permit specialist, as Peter so helpfully described the role that you filled, Peter, with the agency, I just wanted to say that many municipalities have this position and are sort of providing this service at the local level. So oftentimes this falls either formally or informally to a zoning administrator or a municipal employee that works in permitting and inspection. Is that a significant part of their job is in permit navigation and sort of education and outreach for regulation, specifically local regulation. But in the larger municipalities in the cities that have economic development departments or staff, often there is another municipal role that is really a municipal developer who's someone with an experience in development within the state of Vermont that is providing this sort of regulatory navigation for a prospective project. That could be a business, it could be for a housing development, it could be for a multi-use, it could be for a public-private partnership, but they're really providing this sort of high-touch service that sounds really similar to what Peter is describing, to a team, organization, entity that could be at any sort of stage in a planned development. I know many of the ski resorts, I don't know if the ski resort representative is on here, but many of the ski resorts also provide this position or role where they have someone in-house navigating the various departments within the resort through the state regulatory system. So I think it's an important service given the complexity and the number of changes happening in the future with the state's own regulatory regime. It just seems to make a lot of sense. It's a service that certainly people need and other entities besides the state are currently providing. It's typical that that role is housed within an economic or housing development initiative, right? So that's my comment. I guess I also just see the sort of role and responsibility of providing service, access, transparency, and information to stakeholders, citizens, advocacy groups, organizations, communities, sort of other than the permit holder, as being like a very different scope. So to me, it's like there is like an ombudsman or similar role that could be productive potentially in resolving concerns, questions, opposition, sort of pre-appeal. Like, I don't know, is this like a mediator? I guess I'm sort of confused about the two. I see one as a very like education focused, high touch service that is most closely connected with the sort of goals and motivations of development and the permit holding entity. And the other could maybe serve a totally sort of different value to land use.
Jana?
Just thinking about what Samantha is saying. One thing though is that I would argue that most of our municipalities are not able to provide that kind of resource to developers, let alone anyone else. What is required of local zoning administrators is that they must include a statement on every permit that they issue that says you may need a state permit, so you better go find out whether you need a state permit. But that's about as far as it goes. There's no sort of hand holding beyond putting that statement on a local zoning permit. But I hear what you're saying, Samantha, about the dual roles, and maybe to you they sound contradictory. And I think we're trying to think broadly, and I think that maybe part of this is sort of pie in the sky, but maybe we don't have to consider those two roles as being confrontational or conflictual or opposed to each other. But we're just thinking about serving the public interest at large.
And Pete, I want you to jump in here, because right now you're a district coordinator and you take all comers. How do you manage? If an applicant comes, asks you about, I need some information, some assistance, and then an opposing party comes in on the same project, how do you handle that?
So I handle it by being upfront with both of them that I help all comers. That's the term I use. I don't say that to everybody who calls me, right? But when it's relevant and I'm talking to an applicant, for example, about a permit application, we can talk pretty frankly about, what issues do you see going on here? And I can say, actually, I already got a call from your neighbor with questions about what you're planning to do. And just so you know, I help you both. I'm going to help you as the developer with the process, the application process. I'm going to answer any questions you have. That's my job. I'm here to do that. But if your neighbor calls and they want some advice about how to file a petition to become a party, if they have questions about the process and the criteria and how Act 250 works, I'm going to answer their questions too. That's my job. I don't, I'm not taking sides. I'm helping both of you so we have a smooth process. I have a feeling that's what a lot of town zoning administrators have to do, right? So I know that had some first-hand experience with what Samantha's talking about. Like the towns run the gamut from no zoning, part-time zoning administrator with limited zoning to full-time zoning with an Office of Economic Development. All of those things sort of exist on a spectrum, right? There's, in my mind, right? So backing up a little bit, some of this is these functions are going to happen regardless, right? People are going to call with these types of questions no matter what we decide here or what you all decide here. And one of the things I'm saying to you is a lot of it's fallen to a lot of the things I used to do as a permit specialist have fallen to the district coordinators, and I've had the opportunity to see both. Some of it's a question of like, where do you want to devote your resources? Do you want to devote your resources, say, to just getting your applications done as quickly as possible? We are really only concerned about getting our applications out as quickly as possible. We don't want our, staff answering a lot of questions from the public. They can call somebody else. Just get your applications out. Or do we want to help people? And then if we want to help people, which I think we do, what's the best way to do that? One way to do it is to devote a certain number of staff to just doing that, knowing that that person's not going to be feeling the pressures of getting permits out the door, of the other things. They can just focus on helping people. And then Samantha's point about there's a conflict between, helping business, helping applicants, and maybe some of this larger ombudsman role where you are also helping opponents. But to me, I think you can, well, for one, I think you can leverage the overall desire on the part of the development community to get permits, to have their permits, speed review of permits and have more certainty in permits. And so maybe you can, and I can say that I think I spend the vast majority of my time as a permit specialist helping developers, right? But then also leverage that to also get some of that other sort of ombudsman type help for everyone. And I think the way you do that is through training, and clarity, so that, yeah, you're a developer, you want to know where to turn, you call this person and they will help you, but understand that they may also help the odd person who also has questions about how to oppose a project. All of which is not to take sides, it's just to make the process move as smoothly as possible.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I will also remind folks, because this was mentioned, I've forgotten which meeting, maybe the third meeting, that ACCD actually had a permit specialist position, and it's only recently that they don't. And that was specifically to help permittees literally like handhold through the whole process, is my understanding of it. And ACCD folks, I don't think were able to come today, but there was one that was actually housed in the Economic Development Agency. So, John's here. Okay, John, you want to jump in and share some info?
There we go. Yes, thanks, Brooke. Sorry, I wasn't able to join till around 2 o'clock, but I just heard that. Yeah, I think the last permit specialist, as you would call it, that wasn't the title of the position, but was probably Kurt Carter. You know, Kurt, he retired, boy, over 10 years ago. He worked with Frank Coffey up at GBIC after he retired from here. But I can't recall anyone succeeding him in that role other than one of my other duties as assigned that I fulfill, which I did a lot with Kurt, you know, on that over the years. And there wasn't anybody before Kurt. He was a former district coordinator, I think. I don't know which district, but he had been. And he was doing that when I came to the agency in 1997. So he's the only one that comes to mind. It's certainly a very valuable resource. I know in the time that he and I worked together, we accomplished a lot with the Agency of Natural Resources and the feds, Army Corps of Engineers, you name it, to really help facilitate just more efficient navigation through the various regulatory processes. And you know, being a former environmental division lawyer from the AG's office, I'd also disabuse a lot of the applicants of the, you know, initial bias they would have that everybody's against them, and try to help them understand that if they just ask the questions early, they'll do better off than waiting till late in the process.
Oh, that's really helpful. I'm so glad that you made it. Because I didn't ever understand what the time frame was or anything of when that existed. John, do you have any thoughts on being able to serve the entire population, whether it's neighbors or permittees from an office like we're discussing?
Boy, I mean,
not to put you on the spot or anything.
I'd have to think it through from, you know, the conflict of interest standpoint, if you're depending on who the you know, inquiring parties are, and who the person is that's responding, and how you construct communications so that, one, people will be willing to ask and volunteer their interests and information, and two, that could be handled responsibly. That's really important. I mean, I think way back when there were permit specialists, if you will, there was another name for them. I remember a woman named Nancy Manley many years ago at A&R, but very helpful at the land use office, at Secretary's office in Natural Resources, working in concert, in parallel, and we would coordinate, you know, going as far back as something big like, say, the Husky injection molding development in Milton that required, you know, different tracks in different agencies, and then at the higher level, some correspondence, and that worked. And many years ago, there was an office at that high level in Massachusetts called something like, it's since exploded into something much bigger, but it was called the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, which was sort of like a super agency office. It was small, but it acted more like an arm of the administration, which basically said to administration appointees, you're all on the same team, work together. But they helped fulfill that role consistently with knowledgeable people in the appropriate fields, but very streamlined staff. I remember that being one of the better resources I'd seen in the New England Region 1 states when we went to EPA meetings down in Boston. But yeah.
Oh, thanks so much for sharing that. Billy.
Yeah, just want to add on the ACCD point. While they don't, I think, have the in-house specialists anymore, it's very common for them to identify new development projects that are priorities for their agency and initiate permit scoping conversations with other state agencies. We recently did one for the proposed redevelopment of Southern Vermont College, where something comes in through ACCD and they alert my agency, ag agency, VTrans, whomever, and we convene a scoping meeting for those potential applicants to kind of walk through the process. So that functionality exists. It's not confined to an office or a person, but that's a common occurrence that's more focused on the developer side, less the community side, but that exists.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Annette?
So back to the community side, I want to describe what I do. I run into a lot of Vermonters who are not computer literate, not technically literate, and who do not understand the regulatory process at all. This is goes to the point that not all development is good development, that often citizen participation improves development, whether it's clustering houses and leaving more open space, or saying, no, this is bad. I mean, not every permit should get issued. And so I, especially in this age of Zoom, I do webinars with people. I take them through the statutes. I take them through the process, particularly at the PUC. The common line is people say they speak a different language. People need to have things translated. A petition is an application, things like that. And then I will help them intervene, so get access to the court. Whatever they want to say, they don't know how to format documents or even file documents. I do a certain amount of filing just because people are very frustrated. They call me in tears trying to navigate EPUC. These are common problems, whether it's the PUC or Act 250 or ANR. ANR has an environmental notice bulletin, but you can't send a link to a particular project. And people, they have to create an account. People are just, a lot of Vermonters are not literate in this world in which everyone in the administrative world is living. If you wanted to go to another discussion point of what would this Ombuds office do, I do want to bring up that New Hampshire has, for large projects, and this specific for energy projects, they have something called the Council for the Public, and I'm just going to read from the statute. The chair or the administrator shall notify the Attorney General of all administrative proceedings. The Attorney General may appoint an Assistant Attorney General. They've also, I know, appointed people who are in private practice as counsel for the public in administrative proceedings. Upon notification that an application for a certificate has been filed with the committee in accordance with RSA 162H7, the Attorney General shall appoint an Assistant Attorney General as a counsel for the public. The counsel shall represent the public in seeking to protect the quality of the environment and in seeking to assure that an adequate supply of energy. The counsel shall be accorded all the rights and privileges and responsibilities of an attorney representing a party in formal action and shall serve until the decision to issue or deny a certificate is final. This section shall not be construed to prevent any person from being heard or represented by counsel, provided, however, the committee may compel consolidation of representation. And it also allows for the counsel for the public to engage consultants and legal counsel, and the applicant pays the costs. So as we look at a possible separate entity that is to assist on the environmental justice side of things and help parties gain access, how far are we looking at going? Could it go as far as actual representation? And I raise that as a question to discuss.
I think that's a fascinating question and goes to the heart of it. You know, what is the role that we are willing to define? So I would love to hear reactions to, I think I look at it as a continuum. You know, on one end is, you know, providing information, and on the other end is actually representing somebody, you know, and giving them legal representation. There's a lot of real estate between those two extremes. So, Peter.
Hi, thanks. So I've been listening carefully, and I think, you know, I go back to actually the original document that you put up, and the number of different agencies that are required to, you know, kind of come up with a plan for environmental justice, and you know, they're so broad and so diverse that, you know, I'm not sure how how all of them should be or can be involved. I appreciated what Jana had to say, you know, hey, can we get somebody who can, you know, work both sides? But I, you know, the more I've listened, the more I believe that this has to be kind of dual roles, right? You know, one for the applicant and one for, you know, to represent the public who are potential opponents to an application. And the reason that I feel that way is because of a, you know, reliance on guidance that you're getting from, you know, an ombudsman or whoever. You know, and if one person, you know, is providing advice to both sides, it doesn't seem like either party could, you know, completely rely on the recommendations. Not to say they wouldn't be honest and forthright, but just, you know, it would be you know, it would be tough to get guidance from somebody who is also guiding your opponent in an applicant process.
Thank you, Peter. That's no, that's a great point.
Yeah. I mean, I wish there was a
think,
way to do it, but you know, I'm not certain that there is.
because I think one of the most important issues, I refer to it as a role, but where does information providing information and providing advice begin, right? Yeah, no, really, really important distinction. Janet.
I appreciate Peter's argument, and I'll just sort of harken back to what Pete just said a little bit ago in terms of the coordinator's role, taking all comers. Also, zoning administrators do that day in and day out, all day long. And so I don't think it's impossible if if what we're doing is implementing the written word of the guidelines. I mean, there's always gray areas, and that person can acknowledge those. And, you know, and can acknowledge that, you know, the deciding authority is the person who's going to make that decision. So sometimes that is the person. If it's a district coordinator, it's the JO. If it's the zoning administrator, it's administrative permit, but often it's the panel that that person refers the case to.
I think this highlights one of the most important things is I think that we need to determine what are we talking about. I mean, the question that Annette just raised. And my feeling about it is that we stick to the facts, ma'am. You know, taking the information that Pete has provided to us, understand it happens in the municipal arena as well. And I think this is information that we are providing to all comers. And, you know, in terms of strategy or advice about, you know, what choice should I make here? Let me just go back to Pete just for a minute and say, has that been a problem for you? Do people come and ask you for like strategic or legal advice? And if so, how do you respond to that?
I have to tell them I can't give them legal advice, right? I mean, I have to tell them that. You know, you have to just be, I think you have to be clear to people, with people about what you can and can't do. I know Samantha's got her hands up, and I also know we're out of time. We're running out of time. With the Nets example, I have limited experience with the PUC. I will say it is way more litigious, legalistic, whatever. I would much harder for people to navigate than Act 250, which I think is a lot easier than that. And I'd like to hope that you wouldn't need, that level of, an assistant attorney general gets appointed to represent people on Act 250 cases. Whereas I could see how that could be the case for some at the PUC, like, you know what I mean? And so at some point, I'd love to hear from Annette, where she thinks we could improve our process to make it easier for pro se people so that no one feels like they need to do something, like that for an Act 250, in an Act 250 case. Because I have a feeling she has some opinions about that. But
I would
yeah,
like to briefly say I'm a big fan of the district commission process. I don't see the need, except for the types of roles that district coordinators are playing right now. But this stakeholder group is also about appeals. And when it gets to the appeals level, the citizens are pretty challenged by that. It's cool. Yeah.
Right. Samantha, you're going to have the last word unless we have some public that want to speak up after.
Thanks. Hopefully this is a good last word. I wanted to first say, I really appreciate the conversation and the sort of foresight in directing the stakeholder group to explore these questions of equity and transparency and justice in both the permit acquisition and the appeals process. And I want to make sure we don't assume who the stakeholder groups with a sort of need for better access, transparency, and opportunity for participation in the process are, and specifically that they would be likely opponents to a development. I mean, there are many stakeholders, community members, citizen groups who may wish to have better insight into the sort of pre-development path of any project, who could be potential users, potential neighbors, potential employees, who could, if you're talking about adding an arm to a hospital, are they people who need access to different types of and more affordable healthcare in their community? If you're talking about student housing, are these students struggling to afford a place to live off campus, and would they like to be able to participate in supporting a project through the many stages of permit acquisition? Is it a municipality that doesn't have permitting and zoning but wants to understand the progress and changes that are happening to a planned development in their community that they may wish to support and that the community may have envisioned and ultimately plan on benefiting from? So I think there's sort of all types of users who may want or need more from the sort of pre-permit process as it exists now. I'm also reflecting on what Billy shared about that specific example of the interagency scoping initiated by ACCD for that for the Southern Vermont College. And I think that sounds a lot like what happens at the municipal level, right? Like the municipalities that are best resourced have the most local capacity, and where there are priority developments, those developments can benefit from these high touch navigation resources. And I think that's that's part of the problem that we've seen over many years. And a 10-unit development in Chester may be that community's priority, and it may not be the state of Vermont's priority. So I think when we're talking about where these tools should be built, if they should be built, if there's a need for them, how they can be delivered, it's you know, are we making it available to everybody? Are we making it available to the most politically favorable or the most politically controversial projects? Are we making them available to the most expensive and largest developments? Are we making them available to you know, single family residential development projects? You know, I think there are a lot of people who are homeowners and residents who find themselves in sort of the crosshairs of state regulatory regimes and trying to dig a new well, repair a septic, extend their driveway, add an ADU, right? And they sort of deserve the same level of access into the system as the multi-use, large-scale professional developer working in an urban environment.
Thank you, Samantha. I will give Ed Stanek the last word. He got his arm up in time.
Thank you. I just wanted to basically reinforce what Pete and Annette have been saying about the assistance of the public in the local office, in the district offices. Frankly, I thought it was a tragedy a couple of administrations ago when the shift went away from so-called one-stop shopping. Up until that point, the district offices were well-staffed, and the public could come in, applicant or adjoining landowners, and we could walk them around to the various divisions and departments so they could get assistance at one place. The bean counters broke all that up. I thought that was an unfortunate occurrence. Similarly with the permit specialist, it was a hand-in-glove relationship with the district coordinator, both for applicants and for parties. A quick comment on how, when I was a district coordinator, I would assist the neighbors and yet maintain a strict objectivity. I would make them aware, for example, of similar cases. All those files are public files. People would sit down and review projects which had already gone through the process to see how the process worked, what exhibits looked like, what similar parties had filed for the district commission. I would make people aware of the e-notes so people could look up decisions by themselves, not giving them legal advice, but just providing them a roadmap how they could get to the correct answers. One final comment, minor applications. For many years now, the percent of applications processed as minors has skyrocketed. I think it's now around 85 to 90% of the applications are processed as minors. I have assisted people around the state with this, and there's a serious problem with this. Even the notice itself is daunting for the typical member of the public. They'll get the notice, and then they just try and figure out, how do I participate in interpreting that notice? You know, when there used to be a time where the district commissions were inclined, if an adjoiner called up and asked for a hearing, and there were legitimate, reasonable issues under the criteria, the commissions were inclined not to give much thought to it. They would convene a hearing just on that one or two criteria. Public participation was more authentic. Now, it's a very unfortunate circumstance, at least with a few of the district commissions, they seem to have switched to a very constricted interpretation of Rule 51. In some districts, it's extremely difficult for a member of the public to obtain a hearing from a district commission. You almost need to hire an attorney just to get your foot in the door under Rule 51. So anyway, I'll end here. I really support comments from Pete and from Annette. It used to be a much more user-friendly process, and you know, we really don't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel used to have existed, but it was just taken apart a few administrations ago. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed. Appreciate your input. Well, that concludes our meeting for today. We have not yet rescheduled the next, the 8th meeting, but it's likely to be week after next. We're going to give a little bit of a delay because I want to be able to really present some information about the court to our stakeholders and have a conversation that focuses on the pros and cons of that debate we've been having all along about court versus board. So if you'll be patient, we'll get out a notice as soon as we can for our 8th stakeholder meeting. And as always, please feel free to contact me offline if you have questions or comments. I just got an email from John Kessler and it has an ID on it. I will share that. And it looks like Annette has sent me the information from New Hampshire. So I will share that with you folks and look forward to our next time together. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brooke.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brooke. Hey, Ernella.